First things first, Kragen, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm doing well. Well, considering the state of the world, of course.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course.
but I've been talking way too much about that, so I'd like to jump into the music and then
Okay.
fun things. So one thing is, you grew up, or you were a teenager in the 80s, and you grew up in Santa Monica, I believe, or that area,
Yep.
and close to the Bay Area. What was it like growing up at that time with all that explosion of music around you?
Well, I was basically in the Los Angeles area. So
Right.
for me during the 80s, my local heroes was the band that I sort of followed and watched every time I could was Dark Angel.
Right.
So, I saw them so many times, every chance I got. We didn't get to see the Bay Area bands quite as much because they were about 500 miles north.
Sure.
But I was a huge Bay Area thrash fan. That was always my thrash was my favorite genre. I loved other stuff too, like hard rock and metal stuff at the time. But that was always my go-to. So every chance I got to see the Bay Area bands, I did as well.
What was it about that music, and especially at that age?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it was the aggression. As a guitar player, the guitar work was like really intricate and interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I liked the bands that had melody in the vocals, but there weren't many of them. Heathen was one of them, Metallica. So, I mean, and at the same time, as death metal came out, I remember when I got Scream Bloody Gore by Death, or even the first couple Possessed albums. I mean, those I liked that stuff as well, even though there wasn't melodic vocals. It was something to do with the guitar playing and the speed of the music and everything. I just found it fascinating.
That's an interesting point because over the years you've kind of collected all kinds of guitar influences and developed the way you play quite extensively. But now this new record is described as kind of a mixture between the old metal and or the old thrash and then kind of the modern metal music. So can you talk me through how you kind of developed yourself as a guitarist?
Well, I mean, I started playing when I was like 8 years old, but I had an acoustic, and it was, I couldn't play Back in Black on it. It didn't sound right. So sometime when I was a teenager, I got an electric, and I started taking lessons, but the teacher that I had he didn't get it. Like he was like he was a 60s and early 70s rock guy, and he just didn't understand like the hard rock and metal stuff that I liked. So I remember there was one day where I was I took a cassette in of this song, and I said, I want to learn how to play this. And I think it was I Want to Be Somebody by Wasp.
Okay.
And it had this riff in it with alternate picking. And this teacher, he was struggling and he couldn't figure it out. And while he was trying to figure it out and listening to it, there was like a little cassette player or something in the lesson studio. And while he was trying to figure it out, I figured it out myself by ear. And I went home and I like played along with the recording, and I'm like, okay, I get this. Like I went to my parents and I said, I need a new guitar teacher. And I found this, they happened upon this other lesson studio. And the teacher that I got ended up being a studio musician in LA. And so he really helped me develop not just my playing, but also taught me about tone and control over what I was playing. And, I mean, it was definitely like that was the thing that sort of took my playing to the next level. And then from there, I went to college and studied music, and I studied at a jazz school, and I learned a lot and then just kind of developed my technique, I guess, more or less on my own.
Okay.
After that.
Because one thing I find very interesting about you is that you play in several different bands at several different times, of course. But is it for you, can you kind of separate all those things, because you do a lot of writing for those, do a lot of playing for all of those bands?
Right.
How do you kind of juggle all those kind of influences and feelings and strands of music?
Well, I mean, each one of the bands kind of has their own sound. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I have to, as a person who plays in multiple bands, I have to know, okay, well, this thing I'm writing definitely does not fit this band, because this band wouldn't do X, Y, or Z. Right. You know, Prototype is very different from, you know, any of the other bands that I have, for example, because there are progressive things in there that the other bands just wouldn't do. It wouldn't sound like those bands. So, in that way, I mean, I guess what I try and do is I just analyze like what makes each band sound like it does, and then try and write towards that. I don't let those rules hinder my writing. I let it come out naturally. So there probably is some bleed over from one to the other. You know, I'll stick something in a Heathen song that might not have been in a Heathen stuff before, but it's subtle. I do it in a subtle way where most people would never notice, you know. You know, I guess that's the only way I can sort of describe it.
Because if we go back to kind of the start of Empire of the Blind, which was around 2012, I think.
Yep.
What kind of mindset were you in when you wrote those songs, and what kind of sense did you have of where that album would be going, or the songs that you were writing at the time?
I just started writing. I mean, in 2012, we signed with Nuclear Blast, and so I basically said, okay, well, we just signed a new deal. We're ready to get started on the new material, and I started writing. And I would say probably out of the 6 songs that I wrote in the beginning, 5 of them made the record, and 4 of them are exactly the same as what I wrote. Didn't change anything. I mean, even the solos and stuff, I already had them all mapped out. So there was one song which ended up being the title track, which was revised. It just all of us, you know, Lee and Dave didn't think that it was where it needed to be, and I agreed. So I went back and sort of reworked it. But the mindset ultimately, the 3 of us, Lee, Dave, and I, talked while we were on tour in Europe for the Evolution of Chaos, and decided collectively that we wanted the next album to be, you know, shorter and more concise songs. So we wanted to have sort of the songwriting and epic feel from Victims and Evolution, but with the shorter song structures of Breaking the Silence. And that's what we tried to do with the record.
It's interesting that you say that 4 out of 5 kind of stayed exactly the way they are, because obviously over time you as a person, you change as well. So did you have to rediscover those songs at times?
No, I mean, I'm really, really picky when I write. So if it's not good enough, I'll redo it. If the lyrics aren't good enough, or the music isn't good enough, or there's a part that I just don't think is great, I don't hesitate to sort of tear it apart and redo it. So when I get to a point where I present the songs to the other guys, I have to be happy with it myself. And, you know, every once in a while, there's one where, you know, I was happy with it at the time, but then I sent it to the guys and they were like, I don't know. And then, you know, once they explained, I was like, okay, I understand what you're talking about. Like, I get it. I'll go back and revise it. And I actually didn't revise that song until that was the last one that was finished for the record. And it was an extensive revision, we'll say that. But it's like I said, I have to be happy with it before I even want to show it to anybody else.
This is going to be maybe difficult to put into exact words, but what makes a good song for you then? What are you looking for? And I'm sure this is different for each song, but
yeah, it is. I mean, it is different for each song. It's at the same time though, for me personally, it has to be catchy. The riffs have to be cool and interesting. If there's a lot of melodic content, it has to be, it has to flow together. I don't dislike stuff that's like disjointed. What I mean by that is where the band just suddenly takes a left turn and goes into something completely different. Like I like that stuff, but I don't necessarily enjoy writing it unless it just happens to come out naturally. But I mean, for the most part, I look at songwriting the way that it's been done over the years. I like a good, catchy song.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it seems like we've gotten away from that in metal a lot recently, where it seems to me like things aren't quite catchy anymore. It's more based on how fast is it, or how crazy sounding is it, or
And does that go back to, and if I'm saying something stupid, please let me know, but does that go back to the Iron Maidens and those kind of bands, and who managed to kind of get that mass appeal with melodic content, and then it became too extreme maybe afterwards?
To some extent. I mean, Heathen is kind of, just using Heathen as an example, Heathen is like equal parts Bay Area thrash, new wave of British heavy metal, epic stuff from like Rainbow, and the harmonies from Thin Lizzy. And so you've got these things, and all of those bands wrote songs. Okay, even Rainbow, when they would have an epic song, it still had parts, and it was put together like a song. It might just be longer and more epic sounding, right? But they were still writing catchy, cool stuff, even if it was a 7-minute song or whatever. So I mean, that's kind of where I think my songwriting influences come from. I like the catchy songwriting, and I mean, even the old thrash stuff had that catchy songwriting stuff in it. It might have been, it might have been crazy and super fast and everything, but it was still had the sort of, I guess, traditional song structure to it.
Sure. So let's jump into the record a little bit further, because it is quite a diverse record. There are fast songs, but like you say, there's also some more melodic and more subdued songs. So, for instance, if you take Shrine of Apathy, that's one of those more melodic songs on the record. Did you have the words already, or does that start with just the music?
I had that idea for a long time, and it was one of those songs that took a while for me to get it where I wanted it. It's a ballad, and I wanted it to be a ballad in sort of the traditional sense of like the late 70s, early 80s stuff, where it made you feel something. A lot of bands do what I call soft songs, but they don't make you feel anything. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be something. The subject matter is about all the people that we've lost in recent years, and it's sort of I wanted it to make people feel something. So it took me a while to figure out how to get it there. I had to experiment with a lot of different things and add parts, and then when we got in the studio and Dave added when he added his vocal performance, he did such a great job on it. So this band has always had diversity in it in terms of the music. You go back to Victims of Deception, they had Prisoner of Fate, and they had In Memory on the Recovered EP. There's always been that side of the band. And, you know, we may have done a little bit of a different presentation with this song. But again, you know, this band doesn't like to repeat itself. We like to try and do different things on every record.
And it's interesting that it's apt that you say that, talk about David's vocal performance on that song, because I could really hear that he went all out on that song. And when a song has such a emotional theme to it, that it's very close to you, that it's about people you knew and loved. What is it like then recording a song? Is it very emotional? Is it very difficult because you want to get it perfect?
Well, I'm a perfectionist anyway, so the whole process was difficult.
Okay, fair enough.
And I made it difficult for everybody else because I was so picky. But at the end of the day, I mean, you know, that's why we do this. I mean, to me, when you make an album, it lasts forever. A live performance is one night, but the album lasts forever. And so when we do it, I want to, you know, and this band hasn't traditionally released a lot of stuff. So when we do it, I want it to be great. I think the other guys do too, you know. So we push each other and push each other. I probably push them harder than they push me, but I push myself, you know. So I felt like there was a lot of, you know, there was a lot to sort of live up to. The band has had a history of making good stuff. It's kind of quality over quantity. And the new album just had to live up to that. When you're gone for 10 years, I don't think you can come in and put out a stinker. It's got to be great.
Fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel that pressure then from people? Because I can imagine people are continuously asking you, when is the new music coming? When is the music coming?
Absolutely felt the pressure. You know, I gave myself more than a number of tension headaches during the making of the record, putting the pressure on myself, you know, to make sure that the songs were as good as they could be. And you know, it was a lot of work, but at the end of the day, the end result is worth it. You know, it's I think we're all very proud of the record, and you know, it really came out great.
Yeah, what was it like then? Because it's been such a labor then to finally hold kind of a physical copy or a finished product in your hand. What is that moment like? Is that kind of, are you thinking about things you still want to change, or?
Well, I mean, I'm waiting for the CDs to show up at my house today. So I run the Heathen web store too, so I have to ship everything out to everybody.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I mean, it's great. You know, that's what we work towards. You know, we put all this time and energy into, you know, writing the music and writing the lyrics and recording everything and getting everything just how we want it, and including the artwork. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So when you finally get that, you know, physical copy in your hands, it's like, wow, we made this, you know. I mean, that's how I am with a lot of things that I do, whether it's music or guitar books or whatever, you know. I mean, to me, I love creating, and when you have that thing in your hands that you created, it's a great feeling. I mean, there's nothing better.
Sure, I can't imagine I'm not a musician, but I get the sense. Getting back to the record then, because one thing I also find interesting is you mentioned 5 demos were kind of already written in 2012 that ended up on the record. Mm-hmm. Does this include the lyrics?
Yeah. By about 2014, I think I had 5 of the songs with lyrics.
Okay. Because what I find interesting, and some songs are a little more personal, some are more about the world as it is. But back then, it wasn't the way it is now. But some songs seem more apt, maybe even now than back then. So what is that like? But can you take me through that process of kind of that creativity, having something in your mind, and then kind of seeing the world move towards what you're writing about?
I mean, some of those things, you know, the lyrics for, let's say, The Blight and Empire of the Blind, those were more recent, obviously.
Okay.
but then other ones like The Gods Divide, that's it. That was one of the original demos, and that's sort of in that sort of social political realm. It's a lot of this stuff it's timeless. It's always happened throughout time. It's just different. It's a different presentation now. So, you know, this band's probably talked about propaganda and stuff like that over the course of the years forever and ever. And now all that's different. It's the same. It's just that now it's using actual news media and social media to spread the word much more quickly by hitting share. So, but the topics they've always been there. You know, it's just a different method now of distribution.
But I can imagine a song like The Gods Divide. I mean, especially in an election year like it is this year, it's very relevant, kind of the people that we look up to, and so is that? And I think you touched upon it earlier, but is that kind of part of the type of music that you write, that you do want people to think, and you do want people to walk away from it with more than just, oh, that was a cool song?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about like thrash metal, the very, very early days, the lyrics were, you know, bang your head against the stage, and you know, it was about the bond of real metal, right? Which is it was sort of the antithesis of the hair metal stuff that was happening, and it was so popular. But as it grew, thrash metal became more and more about making a political statement or a social statement. There were some, you know, just like Heathen, this band has always had a mixture of sort of social and political topics and more personal stuff. And that's just how this music has kind of always been. It's been I think the guys in the band want people to think about what's going on in the world around them. And, you know, while there probably are some lyrics that are not that deep, there are also a lot that are really deep, you know, and I mean, in various bands, and so it's always been that way. And I think that's one of the things that I liked about it as well as a teenager, was that there were a mixture of topics, just like the variety in Heathen's music. There's variety in the lyrics too. And to me, that's how those classic records that we love, you know, I'm thinking like the early Metallica stuff that everybody holds up as like, this is the crown jewel, right? That's what those albums had. They had a variety of not just music, but also with the lyrics. And it's creatively, it's great, because then you're not stuck writing the same thing over and over again. Like, you know, I mean, I can't imagine being in a band where I have to write about Satan all the time or whatever, you know, where it's like, that's the topic and like, that's what the band's known for. It's like, okay, man, well, now what can I do with this? You know, whereas in this, you know, in this band, there's so much variety. There isn't a fear of writing something different, because the band's probably already written something different like that before, right, musically or lyrically. So to me, creatively, it's very open, and there aren't any rules. You know, I mean, thrash metal nowadays, thrash metal seems to have all these rules and regulations. And when we were young, thrash metal was all about breaking the rules and doing whatever you wanted in your music. So.
And it's interesting how kind of that got turned around, because it's obviously since you started with Psychosis and everything, the music industry has changed quite a bit and has shifted in terms of how money is made, but also what type of music is popular and played on the radio. So how do you see the place, not maybe specifically of thrash metal, but metal and rock music in general these days? How do you perceive it and its place in kind of the musical landscape?
There's actually a lot of it. It's just that there's sort of two big types of hard rock and metal stuff, right? So there's the stuff that that gets played on what they call active rock here, radio, okay, which is all the stuff that's commercially acceptable. Okay. Some of those songs some of those bands write really good songs, but your thrash metal guy isn't going to connect necessarily with it because it's commercially acceptable to like that band. And then there's the other stuff, which is the not commercially acceptable, which is all the thrash and death metal and, everything that doesn't sell mass quantities. And even within that, now it's broken down into subgenres. So when I was a kid, there were subgenres, but there was like, okay, there's metal, there's thrash metal, and there's death metal, and that was like, and maybe black metal. Okay, there were like 4 types, and now it's like it's ridiculous how many subgenres there are. Blackened death metal and thrash prog, and I mean, at the time though, we didn't care about that. If bands crossed over and did something a little different, it was okay. I mean, how many thrash bands would start with a slide guitar and clean stuff like Cajun Hell by Exodus? But that's what made it cool, is they would do something just out of the blue. And yet it became one of those songs where everybody wants them. They're like, why don't you play this live? So.
And this is something I've thought about personally quite a lot. And is that just a question of your generation being more free almost in what they can do with these days? So much, not just attention from media, social media, and everybody having their opinion, but also in terms of finance, that they have to be able to sell it. So the record label just says, no, you can only make something between this, and the rest we won't put out.
I mean, I don't know. I'll tell you, like, Nuclear Blast gave us no direction.
Right. That's what I hear about Nuclear Blast. Yeah.
They didn't tell us to do anything. They didn't tell us not to do anything. They let us make the record we wanted to make, which is just like the old days. I think the real difference between back then and now is bands used to be able to make a living off of the music itself. Okay, they would make an album and it would sell enough copies that they would get money from making the album, and then they would go on tour, but then they would be kind of motivated to go back and make another record, right? Because they didn't spend like their life on the road. They were making music and creating, and then going out and supporting it, and then going back and making another record. And so bands had an album, every year, 2 years, somewhere in that time frame, except Heathen. But that was because they were able to make a living from the actual music they were making. Nowadays, bands spend less time being creative and more time touring, because we're basically traveling T-shirt salesmen. We make our living by going out and playing shows and selling merchandise. And it's less about making money from actually playing the music. So what you're starting to see, or what you have seen over the last decade, is bands release fewer albums. There's more time in between them, and they're out on tour constantly. And that's really how I see it. I would love to get back to a place where bands are focused more on the album, because I think, frankly, albums would be better for it. When bands do make albums now, even every 3-4 years, whatever it ends up being, it seems to me like they're like, we got to make a record so we can go back out on tour. So let's just get a bunch of songs together and do it, And of course they're still making great songs, but they're not making they're not sort of taking it to the next level like they used to. Like, those bands used to be competitive, and they're like, we're going to make a better album than yours, and we're going to make art, something that's artistic, and it's a real album thing, and it's not just a collection of songs, so we can get back out on the road. I mean, bands have done that throughout the years too, but that's where I see the difference. I see less emphasis placed on making art and more emphasis on we have to get out and go back out on tour, but they're telling us we need a new record, so okay,
That makes a lot of sense because from what I hear from a lot of musicians, they're always very exhausted with touring, and then I can imagine that not being very conducive to creativity. Well, to round off then, because since the music industry has kind of functioned on playing live these last years, and now that element has been taken away from us as well. And then you do a lot of different things. You've been very productive, I would say, over the years. You've written, you teach, and all kinds of things. But how is this affecting yourself, but also the community of musicians that you're in?
Well, I mean, we're in a weird place right now. We had to make a decision on what we wanted to do with the new record. We had a choice. We definitely had to postpone the release, but that was because retailers, like here in the United States, Amazon is the biggest seller of music. So we had to wait until they would be able to take new product because they were focused only on things that people needed during the pandemic, like rubber gloves and masks.
Sure.
So we had to wait. But then we made the choice of let's get the music out to people when they need it. Right now, everybody's stuck at home looking for new entertainment. Let's release it now. There are other bands who finished their album at the exact same time as us that are holding it, and they're not going to release it until they can go on tour. They'll hold it for a whole year or whatever Whereas to me, I like being creative. So for me, if this continues on and we're not able to tour, I'd like to go make another record and surprise everybody and release it in 2 years instead of 10. It's definitely going to be an adjustment. I think that a lot of bands, certainly all of the crew that work for bands, a lot of the venues, promoters, everybody is really struggling right now. Financially, it's very difficult for people, obviously. But when we sort of don't see an end in sight, we don't know when things are going to return to normal. Everybody's planning for next year, staying positive and planning for next year, but we really just don't know. And when it does return to normal, it's going to be a logistical problem for all of these bands because every band on the planet is going to want to go and tour next year. There aren't going to be enough tour buses. There aren't going to be enough open venues. There aren't going to be enough crew. It's going to be it's going to be overwhelming, and fans are going to be placed in a weird position of there are 3 concerts that I want to go to tonight, and I have to pick which one. And I think next year is going to be a really difficult. Whether concerts happen or they don't, it's going to be really difficult. It may return to some sort of normalcy in the following year. But again, we don't know. It's uncharted waters. And so we're just kind of in this place where we have to adapt and survive. And a lot of guys are getting creative and they're doing different merchandise, types of merchandise than they've done in the past. You're seeing stuff like, puzzles and, anything. They're really, really scrounging, trying to find out what can we do right now to keep things afloat so that we can continue to be musicians, because the only other option is for people to stop, and go get a real job or whatever.
Right.
And obviously those of us that are just musicians, we don't want to do that. This is what we do. So it's really difficult. Streaming is where everybody listens to their music now. The royalty rates are incredibly low. And, people have to keep in mind that even if a song gets 1 million streams, let's say, I don't remember if it was a song or an album, so I'm probably not quoting this right, but let's say it generates $4,000, okay, from those 1 million plays. Then the record company gets it, and then you get your royalty from the record company. Let's just say you have a really good deal and you get half of it, Okay. $2,000. Then you have to split that up amongst the band. And so you can kind of see how it ends up where it's just,
everybody gets a piece, and by the time it gets back to the band, there's almost nothing left in a way.
Well, there's just very little, and so it's not a way to it's not sustainable.
Right.
For an artist to live off of streaming royalties, and I'm sure there are some, but not in this kind of music. Pop music, rap, maybe, hip hop. There are some some artists that generate enough streams where they're making a decent amount of money from it. But it's a new world, and we just have to find a way to adapt to it.
Sure.
I mean, there's nothing else that we can do.
And then leaving the live shows aside, then, because like you say, it's very uncertain. We have no idea when that will be starting up again. What do you hope then that the album that you're releasing, and like you say, you want to release it now to give people something to listen to in these times? What do you hope it will do for the band?
Sell a lot of copies.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, no, I mean, here's the thing. We all feel like we made a great record, and we hope that people can connect with it in some way or another, whether it's with the music or the lyrics or whatever. There's a little bit of something for everybody on this album, and we'd love to see it kind of put Heathen more in the forefront of the thrash metal scene. Frankly, this band has never really gotten the credit that it deserved. I think that in some ways it's because of bad timing with releases, album releases. The large gaps in between didn't help. But we'd like to see this album kind of get Heathen back to, sort of the forefront, or at least put it on people's minds, like some of the other Bay Area thrash bands that get talked about a lot. And, hopefully it leads to some more music. I mean, I would love to do more stuff more frequently. I mean, my commitments with Exodus are over at this point as far as touring. I'm still on their management team, but I won't be gone all the time touring with them, so I can focus on making music. And I have a lot of music, that I'd like to get out into the world, whether it fits with Heathen or other bands. So, like I said, it's kind of uncharted waters. So all we can do is do what we can to stay busy. So,
Yeah, but that sounds good. If you're not on the road, at least you have the space to be creative and see what you come up with next. So that's a good thing. Kragen, I want to thank you a lot for your time. Thanks for taking the time sitting down with me, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for the interview, Robin. I appreciate it.
All right, have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too. Cheers.